The hills are alive with the sound of music. And believe me, in 1964, Hollywood was very much alive with the talk of the production of the sound of music and everybody wanting to be a part of it and, of course, getting cast in it. I was working at the Hollywood Palace and I was dancing with Eleanor Powell, and it was mentioned to me that I should talk to my agent about being sent in to audition for the part of Rolf, which I did do. And he did set up an audition, and I remember I was so thrilled because it was the first time I got a chance to get past the guards and actually inside the studio. And I went to the sound stage and opened the door, went inside, and there probably was 30 young men about my age, most all of them blonde, and they were getting about 10 or 15 seconds in front of a camera. And, of course, I did my turn, and that was it, and it was out the door, and there were probably another 30 ready to do the same thing. And I talked to my agent, and I said I wouldn't have minded if I would have had a chance to sing or to dance or act. But luckily, I had a real break, I feel. He went to a party about 2 months later, and they had already started the production. And he met Pamela DeNova, who was the speech coach. And he was trying to get her interested in Liesel, but she said, we already have a Liesel, but we don't have a Rolf. And he said, well, I have a young man. And she said, well, did we see him? We said, well, he did a little test for about 15 seconds. Did he sing? Did he dance? No, he didn't. Well, do you have a photograph? So he went to his car, showed her a photograph, and she set up a meeting with her the next day on the lot. I met her. She liked me, and she took me over to meet Bob Weiss. And we talked some, and he thought I had a good physical look for the role, even though it wasn't exactly the coloring that he was looking for, which later on, of course, they took care of. So he gave me a script, and 2 days later I came back. He was there as well as the executive producer, Saul Chaplin, and it was the scene where Rolf finds the family hiding in the crypts, which seemed to be the main criteria for having a difficulty in finding Rolf, to have someone that could sing and dance and pull off the last scene. Well, I did it, and they liked it, so they sent me over to Mark Bro and Dee Dee Wood, who were the choreographers, and they had a rating system of A, B, C, D. And I was a very strong dancer at the time, and it was more like they wanted the number 16 going on 17 to look like kids just having a good time rather than, okay, now we're going to dance for you. So they gave me an audition, and they gave me an A, and Bob was pleased with that, and then they sent me over to wardrobe and put me in an Austrian coat and to makeup, where they proceeded to spray my hair blonde. And they didn't have time for a screen test, so they were going to do what they call a personality test, which is basically, Bob, like he said, Dan, I'm just going to talk to you, just be normal, be natural, and react to me in a natural way. So we talked for a while, and the whole studio, the whole sound stage around the camera was full of people. And it was a very exciting time for me. And I remember I said, Bob, do you mind if I sing? And he said, Dan, I didn't know that you sang. And I said, yes, I do sing, and I'd like to sing for you. And he said, what do you want to sing? And I said, well, Bob, I'd like to sing 16 going on 17. So I proceeded to sing 16 going on 17. And I remember when I finished, everybody was smiling. And there was this feeling that I'm going to get the role, which was incredible to me. And 2 days later, I was signed to a 7-year contract to 20th and to play the juvenile lead of Rolf in The Sound of Music. Well, it was a thrilling time. I was, in a very short period of time, I was there because they had already started production, and I went in, and I remember I went to where they were showing the daily rushes, and I sat down behind Julie Andrews, and I remember all the time they were showing the rushes, I was thinking, how can I introduce myself to Julie Andrews? I want to do the right thing and show her how thankful I am for getting the role. And I remember when we stood up, she turned around to me and she said, Dan, I want to congratulate you for getting the part of Rolf. And I couldn't even talk. This was Julie Andrews, congratulating me, and I was, practically speechless. And she was a very, very warm person, easy to work with. She used to work out with us in our classes, and Liesel and I would get together, and she was just like she was in the movie as far as I was concerned as a person. The first thing we did, of course, was shoot the scene, the Nazi scene. And that was the only time, I think, of all the time I was around Bob Weiss, I saw him get a little bit upset, because where they had the flashlight and they were shining it on the crypts when we were looking for the children for the Captain Maria, they also had a huge platform with a big spot up there. And the spot man could not seem to coordinate moving the spot where the flashlight was going. And finally, Bob just stopped the production and had the man removed, and they got another man up, and of course he did a lot better job, and we got the day's shoot done. And from that day on, I remember the kids, because that was the first thing they ever saw me, and all through the rest of the movie, in somewhat a fun way, they'd always call Dan the nasty Nazi. Of course, I would that people would remember me more as the Dan the Song and Dance Man and 16 going on 17. But the scene went well, and if it wouldn't have, I guess probably they may have would have removed me, and but because it was successful, I continued on to the production, and shortly thereafter, we went over and Charmian Carr and myself, Liesel and Rolf, and we did our recording of 16 going on 17. They had us in a little glass box, and then there was a huge orchestra on the outside with Erwin Kossel, and I remember singing 16 going on 17, and I remember when we got done, and they played it back, the whole orchestra applauded for us, and it was a wonderful, wonderful feeling, and then with that, they gave us a record to practice with, with warning clicks, so that as we were shooting other things, because we probably weren't going to shoot this till towards the end of the actual schedule, we had to sing with a 16 going on 70 to make sure we did it exactly right. So we would practice that, throughout the different days when we were on location. And shortly thereafter, I went to a lot of shoots that they were having. I was there when they shot the kids when they made their entrance, when they were introduced to the people who had come to the ball. And in fact, an interesting story there, just a short period, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, I was invited to the Los Colinos studios. Chris Christian had purchased, and he had acquired the actual uniforms that the kids wore in that first entrance. And I remember going over there, and they were doing publicity shots and being around there, and it was such a incredible feeling to actually be there and see the actual costumes after 30 years of this production. But it's always been a great and important part of my life. It's something people have loved, and it seems like there's been a real rebirth of interest, and I've always been really pleased with that. The kids were a lot of fun. I traveled with them over there on the plane, and of course, like kids, kind of the fun thing was that Debbie Turner, she lost her teeth, and she not all of her teeth, but her front teeth, and she had to have these little plastic teeth, and sometimes she had a little bit of a lisp, with a pink parathol, and of course the kids were growing, and some of them were growing faster than the others, and the ones that weren't growing fast enough, they put them in higher shoes, and the ones that were growing faster than the others, they wore less high heels, and Nicky Hammond told me he finally ended up practically doing the movie in his socks. And then I did my scene where I ride up on the bike and knock on the door and give a message to the captain, and have my first main scene there with Franz. And then there in the back, we shot the scene where I arrive with the telegram for the captain, and I'm throwing these rocks. And the funny thing was there were still people inside the house, and they knew not to come outside. We were shooting the scene, but when I started throwing rocks up at the window, this maid comes up and opens it and looks out, and was ist das? Of course, it was a fun time, and it was just one of those things that happen at location which are enjoyable. I mean, they're kind of a pain, but at least it's part of the reality of actually doing the shoot and getting on with putting the picture all together. It was a little tough in some ways for me because I hadn't had any film experience, and having to work backwards and doing the last scene first and kind of going out of chronology was tough. And there were times that I remember when I would be talking to Liesel, where she'd be off the camera and they were doing a close-up, and I'd be talking to a hand on camera to the right or the left that's the same height as Liesel, and having to make it very believable when she wasn't there. Things like that, which, I remember I was in the Marines when the picture came out, and I wondered how it all would come together. And of course, I was really pleased. I saw it the first time in New York when I was on leave, that all the parts fit and everything worked so well. One of the funniest times that we all had together as a cast and crew was when the family was escaping, trying to get out from the mansion, and this huge, is either an auto union, it might have been a Mercedes. It was a big, heavy car, and the captain and Max and I think it was Dwayne Chase were pushing the car, and this car was so heavy they couldn't move it. So off camera they had it must have been 5 or 6 husky Austrians, and they had this huge rope tied onto the front bumper, and here they were pulling this car along while they were pushing it because it was so heavy, and they were in this gravel. And when you see the actual film, I mean, it looks so natural. It'd been so funny if people could have actually seen these these strong Austrian men pulling this car to get it through the scene. But we'll chuckle about that, and it was a funny thing, and it was at night, and we had a lot of times like that. It was just like the takes that don't work, and gives you the real human element and personality of everybody. And which brings me to the last scene, and basically the first scene and the last scene that were shot in the picture I was in, except for a few scenes before that, and I think some work that they did afterward on some scenes with Christopher Plummer when they were in the car when they saw the kids. But that was the last scene, which was 16 going on 17, in which we shot back in Hollywood. We'd already come back from Austria. The gazebo was there with the glass, of course. And of course, there were pipes, water pipes all around that would run down the windows, and the arc lights for the lightning. And Charmy and I were dancing, and we were having trouble with water getting in on the floor. And I don't think Charmy had the rubber type soles on her shoes, and we were doing a kick, and she slipped and fell and put her foot through a glass pane, and we had to stop for a while. And we had to dance around, and we were jumping from bench to bench, and there was a part where I was to take her from the bench, and she jumps off the bench and goes into this spin and into this turn where I spin her out. Well, there was no way I could get her from that bench, jumping and that distance, and keep her in the air into the spin. So here's the wonderful part about filmmaking. We took it up to the point where she jumps, and then I took her into the spin and had her spinning, and then they cut and edited the jump into the spin. And here's this wonderful jump off this bench and this incredibly wonderful spin that looks so terrific on film. And that was one of the great advantages of film. And it was, I always think of that every time I see it, and I've been watching it for how many times? Over 30 years. But there was always a real warm feeling there. Bob was a very kind man. There was an atmosphere that we had something special. I don't know if we knew to the degree of what it was, but when you have a family picture like that with all the elements, the good versus evil, the family and character and strength and family values, it's something that makes it a classic in itself, and it's something that always endures. And I feel very special to have been a part of that. It's a part of my life, always will be, and I guess it'll be my one little spot of immortality that I played the part of Rolf in The Sound of Music, and I will treasure everybody that ever worked in that picture for the rest of my life, and I'm totally grateful for that wonderful opportunity, that magical time in 1964.